Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Akar. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. In today's episode, I chat with Ashley Morgan, founder of Whippet Goods Skincare. After almost 20 years as a high-level marketer, she decided to walk away from it all in a beautiful post announcing her decision. Of course, it caught my attention. Yes, it was on LinkedIn. And so I'm looking forward to having this discussion and sharing it with you all. Let's go check out her story. All right, welcome back. So our guest today is Ashley Morgan. Ashley is the founder of Whippet Goods Skincare, which is a natural, plant-based body care line started as a pandemic passion project. Now, her journey up the corporate ladder didn't come without its costs. So she eventually made best interest for her overall health. And judging by the current traction, not only of the post in which I initially found her, but how she's doing in her business overall, she has definitely gotten off to a great start. So, hi, Ashley. How you doing today?
Hi, Brian. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, definitely. And this is whenever I do have like the initial conversations with someone, and then whether we record a few months later or even months go by after that, I always love hearing what has happened since, which we'll get to. But yours in particular, like what is great about your story is you had this huge viral post, which we'll talk about, that got so much traction, right? And so I'm excited for folks not only to hear from you and about you, but also hear about your company. So before we kind of get into that exit, tell us a little bit about your upbringing and some of the things you've been passionate about professionally.
Yeah, so I come from a long lineage of entrepreneurs. My grandfather is an entrepreneur. He's had a business for the last almost 40 years. He started a business after he retired, a sporting goods business. His father was an entrepreneur, and his father was an entrepreneur. So I have a long family legacy of entrepreneurs. So that spirit has always been in me. Um, throughout my career, even when I was in high school, I've always had a side hustle. Like it's just something that I've always done, whether it be, taking things that I love, like doing makeup and doing people's makeup. And then when I started my locks, I started doing people's locks. And so I've always had a passion project, but I've always had such tremendous fear of letting go of a 9 to 5. And that's been drummed into my head since I was little. Like, you have to go to college, then get a job, right? So you can take care of yourself. So I have been terrified of trusting myself to, you know, pursue entrepreneurship and like really do it full time. So it's always been like side hustles, right? Um, and I've had many of those through my 20s. Always kept a side hustle. Um, Finally, it just came to a pivotal point in 2020. I think we all kind of had that moment of reflection, like, what am I doing with my life? Just, being quarantined and all of those things. Um, and I hit a really hard brick wall, realizing that, I've been in spaces and operating in spaces where I didn't see me often. Um, I was alone and not realizing what that was doing to me internally, what that was doing to my mental health, not seeing myself, and operating in spaces where most of the time I'm undervalued. I'm a woman, I'm a Black woman. I also present younger than I really am. People always think that I'm younger than my actual age. So I kind of get marginalized because of those things. I get pushed to the side, I get undervalued. I have to, raise my voice all the time to be heard in a way that doesn't, offend people, that doesn't, I'm always conscious of all of those things. And what that does over, the 20 plus years I had to operate that way, what that did to my mental health, I didn't realize until I had to pause and really be at home all the time and faced with all of the things that we went through during quarantine, being a mom and a wife. And it just kind of came to a head in a way that I never had experienced before. It manifested in panic attacks, manifested in mental health challenges that I'd never experienced. And I realized at that time that it was time for me to make a change.
Yeah.
And at that time, I still didn't, entrepreneurship wasn't my answer. Still.
Yeah. No. No, without a doubt. And you know, for those who may not know, be that familiar with your journey, tell us prior to launching your own company,
hmm
tell us a little bit about your work journey and kind of what field you were in throughout
Yeah,
these
so
years.
I started my career off working in marketing. I went the traditional route and was working in media. I worked for newspaper. I worked for the Weather Channel. Um, so I started off the traditional route, working in media in advertising. Realized that advertising was dying a slow death because this was in 2000, so before the internet boom, um, like the early 2000s. And so made the pivot to digital, realizing that was the next thing. So I made an early pivot in marketing to digital around 2006, and transitioned to doing digital campaign management, advertising. So I worked for a couple of larger brands doing that. In the travel industry, I worked for a parking company, worked for a large national hotel chain, in their global headquarters. And so I was starting to build my skills in digital marketing. Because I got in early, it opened more doors for me because I had a lot of experience doing something that was relatively new.
Right.
So I was able to climb the ladder pretty quickly at a young age. And I quickly made the transition from working at these large national, like global firms, to really wanting to have some autonomy. I think that was, again, the little spirit of entrepreneurship bubbling in me. So I decided to make the transition to working for, smaller startups. And that's where kind of I found my place. I was able to have more of an impact. I was able to build teams. So I started working for startups in tech. And help my first job in tech, I was the fourth employee, so literally was
Oh,
one of
wow.
the founding members, helping to build a team. I sat on the executive leadership team, and I continued to do that for 12 to 14 years. And I honed my skills. I was able to build teams. I was able to have some of the autonomy that I wanted, not realizing that that was really like the whisper to being an
Mm,
entrepreneur. But again, I was faced with a lot of, especially in tech, especially at that time, there weren't many people that looked like me at all in tech. I was alone. There weren't many women, and there weren't, especially not many Black women as well. So marketing has been my thing. I was a director sitting on executive leadership teams. That's the peak that I climbed to, and most people would look at that and say, "Girl, you made it." It was easy to see that from the outside, but in the inside, that was not how I was feeling.
yeah. And you know, I appreciate you mentioning that. And I happen to what I love to see now more online is folks in these types of spaces talking about that, right? They on men, women, white, black, just the variety of folks always talking about what it's like to be the only, right? The
Mhm.
only black woman here, the only black man here, or so on and so forth, because that sense of, you know, you're showing up to a job 8 to, you know, probably 10 hours a day. Um, Feeling almost like you don't belong, right? And
Yeah.
though that over time can really have an impact on somebody. So I'm really glad that you raised that. And I see a lot more articles that are coming around about that, people talking about it more openly.
Mhm.
That I hope it becomes a bit more mainstream for sure.
Mhm.
Uh,
For sure.
and so you mentioned something about, you know, you talked a little bit about COVID, and look, I got my start truthfully, you know, during COVID, right? And
Mhm.
you know, the launch of this podcast is really because of that. And so I want
Mhm.
to take you back to that time, March of 2020. We're introduced to the pandemic. You
Mhm.
talked a little bit about, you know, the isolation as a whole from a just, you know, the world crumbling type of standpoint, but
Mhm.
talk a little bit about some of the things that you started to learn during this time and how your industry was impacted during these
Yeah.
shutdowns.
So I think I had a false sense of like security, like that my world is not going to change that much because I had been working from home for like 10 years.
Hmm.
So my day to day really didn't change all that much because I had been working from home already. So a lot of people made that pivot to working from home and they had been in the office environment. That wasn't my life. I had been working from home for a long time. So I think I had a false sense of what effect it would have on me. I think the things that got added to my plate during that time was really what caused the challenge because I have two small kids. I had to be a daycare provider. I had to be a kindergarten teacher. And then just the my husband was an essential worker, so he had to still go out. He was still working outside the home, so the anxiety of that. Um, and then I think just because the industry that I was in was already like working from home, like everyone was already working from home. I think as a whole, leadership and everyone in my company didn't realize the effect that that would still have on us, even though our day to day, they still had that false sense of security too. So I think there was not the grace and the acknowledgement that we were struggling. So you had to show up every day like you've always been showing up, but really feeling inside like, this something is feeling different, and not having space to like show that because what do you mean? Like you've been working from home for this is what we do. Nothing's really changed for us. And that was voiced a lot. So I didn't feel space to acknowledge during my work life that I'm not doing okay. And then
Right.
just also too during 2020, the racial reckoning that was happening, I didn't feel space to grieve. I didn't feel like there was just a lot that was going on. And I remember during that time I posted something on LinkedIn like that was talking about we as a people were not doing okay and we didn't have a space to like voice that. And that's exactly how I felt during that time, and it just kept compiling, not realizing for me that ball had already been going down the hill anyway.
Mm.
This 2020 kind of pushed it a little bit further down the hill, a little bit faster, increased the trajectory of it. But for me, that wasn't the tipping point. It had already started to roll. Um, I was just not realizing it and slowly catching up to what my real reality was, like what I was struggling with that I had not been acknowledging the whole time.
Yeah, yeah, and in that post that I mentioned that how I found you, you reference a "Break My Soul" verse, right? That and you acknowledge that look, this was your real life, and so
Hmm.
when you talk a little bit about that, and maybe share a little bit about the
Hmm.
post that you posted on LinkedIn, but talk to us
Hmm.
about how that song really resonated with what was going on in your life at that time.
Yeah. So in last year, I had, between 2020 and spring of last year, I had left the company that I'd been with for the last like almost 6 years, transitioned to another executive leadership role for another software company. That was during I literally started a job a week after quarantine, which was crazy.
Oh,
So I started a
wow.
new job the week after quarantine. And then so during that time, I all of these mental health challenges and all of that stuff had started to arise. And so I'm thinking like maybe it's the executive leadership that's causing me the issues. Maybe I need to step back a little bit and become an individual contributor on a team. Maybe that's the thing that's causing me to feel the way that I'm feeling. So I took another role within a software company, still advancing my career, like from a financial standpoint, from experience standpoint, in a space in an industry that was, very, very liberal, very, um, I don't know if I can say it again. The cannabis tech industry is the industry that I was in.
Okay, I'm okay.
So
Yeah.
that's an industry where I felt like, okay, there's safety here, right? There was a lot of people in this company that looked like me that I had never seen before. So I'm thinking like, okay, this is a safe space. I can feel like this is a space where I won't feel some of the things that I had felt prior. Lies. I ended up still feeling feeling the same exact way, because really I was just trying to continually fit my square peg into this round hole, and it was never going to work. It didn't
Mm.
matter what job I was looking for, and so um, in that moment, I just kind of just like it came to a breaking point. I probably could have had a more elegant departure, had I had
Hmm.
recognized all the signs in the years prior, but I kind of just was like, I'm out. Done. And so at that moment, I didn't really have a plan. I just knew this wasn't working anymore. And I had to take a step out, because when my kids are looking at me and seeing the stress, my husband is seeing the stress, my life at home is being affected, my mental health is a challenge, like, can no longer do those things. So at the time when I wrote that, at the time when I stepped away from my prior job, like I just knew that this wasn't it. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I just knew I needed to take a pause, do some things that I really enjoyed and loved, and then move forward. And so when I decided that Whip It Goods, which is my skincare company, was going to be the thing that I was going to start, it really was not intentional when I left my job that I was going to be doing that. I had already been making skincare products for the last 4 or 5 years, because my daughter has eczema, and then I started reading like the things that I was using on myself and my family. We're just using in our household, and seeing the toxic ingredients, and just researching plants that heal the skin and nourish the skin. And so I had already been making skincare products. Um, a friend of mine I gave her some of my products to use on her psoriasis, and they really helped. And she had been doing craft fairs. She sews and knits, and she's like, "Why don't you bring some of your products to a craft fair?" I'm like, "What's a craft fair?" What are you talking about? I had no exposure to this side at all. And she's like, "Yeah, yeah, I sell stuff. You set up a table." I'm like, "Oh, okay, like a trade show." I'm like, "Okay." I do trade shows. I've been doing trade shows for my entire career. And so at the time, I didn't even have a brand. I had no labels. I
Mm.
nothing. Literally like homemade. Like, this is stuff that I use for my family. But I'm like, I've been working in marketing for 20 years. I could come up with something that looks decent, right? So that's what I did, and sold out and continued to do craft fairs, and realizing like, okay, I'm not at the time too. And let me note this: I was still applying for jobs, like thinking,
Oh,
because the fear, right, is still there. The fear of like, hearing family members like, "Girl, you quit your job? Like, what are you doing?" That was
yeah.
seeping in. And so I'm thinking like, okay, I had this checklist of all of the things that this unicorn job that I was going to find had to have, right? To avoid all of
Yeah.
the mental health challenges I was dealing with.
No, that.
I knew that rage quit, like I'm out. I ghosted my entire network. Like, my professional network had no idea where what I was working on. I just took those few months, and I had disappeared basically. And so when I decided that Whip It Goods was going to be the thing that I was going to do, um, I figured like a way to launch that, help with launching that, was because I hadn't communicated anything to my network, like to write a story about my journey from when I left, and what got me to where I was when I was launching last October. And so I just sat down in a Google Doc, and just, of course, Beyonce song had just come out like a few months before that, and that song resonated with my entire spirit. Like, that's exactly what I was going through. And so I used elements of that song in that story, because that's exactly how I was feeling. And just with the hope that the people that I knew and the people that I was connected to would be exposed to my brand and support me. Never
Yeah.
thinking that it would be anything more than that.
And it was huge. All right. And
Yes.
here's what's funny, right? One, so you and I both have a connection with Beyonce's Break My Soul, because when I launched the show, her song had just come out. And it was almost like her PR team was talking to mine, which is just me. And like
Right.
they released the song, and then my show was coming out, because it's talking about people leaving their
Yep.
jobs, right? And so it was almost like surreal how it happened.
Yep.
But then two, your post popped into my feed because truthfully, another guest of mine who was on season 2, Katie Dunn, engaged with your post. And so
Mm,
I'm always in this, I'm like this LinkedIn evangelist. I'm not like a big creator like that, but I get most of my guests from LinkedIn. And
yeah.
so Katie engages with it. You pop up, and of course it's like right up my alley, right? Because you're talking about leaving, and
Yep.
it's a beautiful post. And then I think I got in around maybe 10,000 likes, and it by the time I think I checked, I mean, I don't know where it's at now, but it was like to like 30 or 40 by the time we initially spoke. And so I was just fascinated by one, what you wrote, because it was beautifully written and it was very, very open and very vulnerable. And I always appreciate those things. But two, then, let's talk about the response that you got. I was reading through your
Mm-hmm.
comments and just everybody was just so supportive, and so that must have felt great. So here you are, you've been in that industry, you've been in marketing, or were in marketing for about 20 years. You showed us, you told us a little bit about why you left, right? So you left in May of 22. When you think back to that decision, or in that process, is there anything you would have done differently?
I think that I wish I would have believed in myself more and not underestimate myself. I think that has been like my Achilles heel is not, and it's because of the environments that I've been in, right? Like some of that feeling underrepresented, feeling marginalized, like that seeps in and it manifests in self doubt, in thinking smaller. Um, and so the things that have happened over the last years have been the last year have been so affirming to me really trusting myself and believing in myself. And the belief that other people have in me was far larger than the one I had in myself. I was thinking way small, right? I was just hopeful that a handful of people would like my stuff, right? Not thinking that this story that's really my story, what I've been going through, that it would resonate with anyone beyond the people that I knew. That was never a thought. Never. Never in my wildest dream that I think that that would happen. And so when I posted it, it was kind of like there was fear because I'm thinking I'm connected to all of my
Mhm.
former bosses. I'm connected to all of my former employees who have worked for me. Um, and this is super vulnerable, right? And some people may catch feelings at knowing this because they had no idea when I'm working with them day to day that this is what I'm going through. So that's the fear that I had, not thinking that people would be inspired, be moved to want to do the same, thinking that people are dealing with exactly what I'm going through and on that same precipice, and hearing my story affirm them making the same decision. So I just wish I trusted myself more and believed in myself more.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think that is, social media gets a bad rap for a lot of things, and truthfully at times for good reasons, right?
Hmm.
But there is a side of it, and I think it happens. I see it on Instagram sometimes, but definitely on LinkedIn as well, because you can see where people actually work, right? Where my one of my themes I talk about, I try to positively impact this human experience. But the beauty in your story is that it does cross racial and gender lines, because when you think about your experience that you went through, there are so many people who connected with your story on multiple levels. Uh, Being a Black woman, being a woman, being marginalized in whatever their bucket may be, but it connected with so many folks. The comments that you got were just beautiful, right? And I love that one, you felt comfortable, even though you're probably a little nervous, right? Like you said, to put that out there, but
Terrified.
that you eventually hit the post button. Yeah, right, right. That you hit the
I
post
posted
button,
it, closed
because
the
if you
laptop, and
just
left.
are able, I love it, right? But because it could just impact that one person. That's the I love that side of social media. And as I
Yeah.
think about, some of the work that I'm doing here, I've gotten some of those comments around. There's episodes I've had where folks have said, you know what? I needed that today because I was in a dark place, right? And I just needed to hear this. And you can't, for me as a creator, you can't hear that type of thing and be like, oh wow, like I'm not doing anything, right? Like you're doing something for some people. And so I love that you put that out there into the world.
Yeah. Thank you.
So
Thank
now
you.
you mentioned Whip It Goods, right?
Mhm.
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned Whip It Goods and how it got started. Tell us a little bit more about. So it's been a year now. At the time we're recording this, you had your year anniversary recently. Tell us how it's going, some of your products, and how just the overall experience has been. Now that
Yeah.
the entrepreneurial bug got you,
Yes, like I'm bitten and I'm not turning back.
right?
So yeah, like I mentioned before, I started making skincare products because of my daughter with eczema, and her doctor, her pediatrician at the time she was 1, told me not to get the medicated creams that she had prescribed for her eczema on her healthy skin. And that was like, what? Like that doesn't make sense to me. If it's bad for her healthy skin, how is it good for her at all? And so that led me to researching alternatives. And so I found different ingredients that were plant derived, mango butter, shea butter, plant oils, things that were had the same anti-inflammatory properties, had the same kind of healing properties as this medicine, without the carcinogens, without the toxic ingredients, the things that are going to be bad for her skin. So I started making things in my kitchen, and it just snowballed from there. And so now I have a line of plant-based body care products. Primarily, my number one seller is of course my whipped body butter. The base of it is mango butter, which I am obsessed with. That ingredient is one of my favorite plant ingredients. In its natural state, it's really firm, really hard.
Oh, really?
Imagine like cold, like really cold butter is its texture. So it's not
Oh,
easy to apply. And so that's why when I was, researching ingredients, I found that ingredient. But my daughter's 1. She's not going to sit and let me like melt something. I need something that's easy to apply. I don't have time
hmm
with her
hmm
running. She wants to run away. So I found that if I melt that ingredient and then whip it by adding air to it, it turns into like a creamy, soft consistency. And so that's where my brand name comes from, because all of my products, most of them include mango butter, which I have to melt and whip. So the whip is what releases the easy to apply, makes it very creamy and light, more accessible, makes this ingredient more accessible to the mainstream because it's easier to use and not so firm and hard. And so I have whipped mango butter. I have a a whipped sugar scrub that also has the mango butter. I also made a soap for her because most soaps would irritate her skin. Incorporated the mango butter into the soap as well. Um, I started falling down the rabbit hole of botanicals, so I have infused oils, and
hmm
I've also been making my own skincare products, like facial care products, about the same time frame, like 4 or 5 years. And so I'm about to start releasing a line of facial care products starting next month in November. So that's coming, and
Nice.
the growth, it started with that post that gave me my first batch of customers. Thankfully my products are of high quality, and I've been able to retain those customers. Some of them have become like friends virtually because they support me and been cheering me on since day one.
hmm
um, I've been able to grow a local customer base. I do lots of trade shows and events and craft fairs to build up. You can now find my products on store shelves here locally in St. Louis, where I
Oh, nice.
live. I'm expanding into wholesale. I did my first wholesale trade show last month. So I never thought that would happen in my first year, that I'd have my products on multiple store shelves. Like, never even dreamed. And that
hmm
goes back to, again, that same thing in my head where I'm like, I'm not dreaming big enough. I'm not trusting myself enough to think that
hmm
these things are possible for myself. So that's been the lesson that I've learned. Like, girl, believe in yourself. Like, you got this. You can do this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'll share with the audience. I have the coconut and bay rum body butter, and it is phenomenal, right? I also have a sugar scrub that is also phenomenal. And I was joking with Ashley kind of before we started recording is that, the coconut, the body butter is so good that, my fingers like scraping the jar, and that just signal that I need to buy another one. Right. So great products that you have.
Thank
I
you. Thank
absolutely
you.
love it. Now, part of the show I always like to get across is really like advice for others, and your story is just filled with so many, learnings about yourself, right? Overcoming kind of your own fears of doing a certain thing, right? But eventually, like you got there. For people who might feel how you felt, let me say in their prior role, or even just right now, currently, what advice would you give them about what next steps to take right now?
Personal reflection. Um, like I said, I think I would have gotten to this point earlier in my life if I would have really done some personal reflection past my fears, because my fears were influencing my decision making. So if I would have taken the time to really stop, pause, and really understand where the root of my angst, my mental health challenges was really coming from, to know that I'm just trying to fit myself in a place where I don't belong. I'm trying to make myself be comfortable in a space that's not for me. Um, I would have been able to save myself a lot of turmoil and a lot of angst and a lot of grief, because I would have gotten to this point a lot sooner. I don't know if I would have been doing this in particular, doing plant-based skincare. Um, I would have hoped that I would have found this passion, but I really would advise people to do personal reflection and really listen to and trust yourself. If you know something's not right, it's not right. And really getting to the root of where that's coming from, and being really honest with yourself about where that's coming from, and taking some action to to get past it. And if it's entrepreneurship is your journey, for me, it's like just take that first step, and then take another one, and then take another one. And it might not be like the same journey as mine, where I just was like, I'm out, because most people don't have the financial freedom, and that's not everybody's real life, right? Um, but you can take the first step and then take another one. And to me, one of the other biggest lessons that I've learned is persistence. That's what's gotten me through this last year. It's been so hard. Like, it's been difficult. I work more now than I ever did in the past. I don't get any days off. I don't get any time off. My brain never gets a time off. So it's not that it's not less work. It's more work. But um, it's showing up every day. It's being persistent. When you get no's, because there will be no's. When you get failures, I launched a campaign and two people buy something, and I'm like, oh, this is failure. I'm never going to be able to sustain a business like this. A lot of people will stop and like, I need to go get a job. I need to go back to what I was doing. Why did I do this? I have those doubts all the time. They're fewer now, but in the beginning, for sure, and it definitely could have stopped me. But every time I feel those feelings, I'm just like, persist, persist. That's the common thread in books that I've read about entrepreneurship, or following on looking at entrepreneurs that I have admired. That's the one thing that they all have in common, is persistence. They did not let failure stop them.
I love that. I love that. And as you think about, the future of Whippet Goods and everything, what impact are you hoping to have in this next chapter of your professional/entrepreneurial life?
I hope that I'm able to um, provide healing for people's skin who suffer from dry skin conditions. That's a huge part of why I even started this. Help to change people's minds on the things that they use and put on their bodies. Because my line is not just for people with dry skin conditions; it's for all skin types. Like, there's just certain things that we've been using for years that are not meant to be put on skin. petroleum jelly as an example, Vaseline. We've used that for years. It's not something that's supposed to be on your skin. It's just not. So, being able to change some people's minds about the things that they use on their body and introduce them to plant-based ingredients that um, not just provide healing and nourishment and relieve dry skin, but also improve your skin over time. And then I hope that my story continues to inspire other people to do the same, whether it's become an entrepreneur or live their dreams or whatever wild dream that they have in their head that they've never taken a step to pursue. I hope that my story is able to inspire them to take that first step. Um, yeah.
No, I love that. I love that. And when you think about what I always love, what I'm doing for guests in season 3 is if there's a question that you have for me that I could potentially answer, either about the show, work, future of work, anything like that. What would you want to ask me?
Yeah, so at the time of recording, you've just crossed a huge, huge milestone for your show, 50 episodes at the time of we're recording this.
Yeah.
Um, what does that mean to you? How
Wow.
has that accomplishment um, affected you, and what impact you feel like you can have through this show or beyond?
That's a great question. When I think of, and something you just said really resonates with me. When I think of what it means to get to 50, it is it is showing up for myself and showing up when, like in your case, you had maybe a couple buyers for a campaign. Sometimes I don't even know who's listening to the show, right? And so I'm showing up now every week because of stories like that. I feel like they really need to be told, stories like yours, because I am really dead set on the fact that this aspect of our lives, work, right, and people leaving work, is something that happens so often and it's frequent, but we don't talk about it enough for a variety of reasons.
Hmm.
And so I'm hoping, very similar to how you hope your story of entrepreneurship, inspires others. I'm hoping that my platform can continue to inspire folks to search for and then find whatever it is that they're looking for. Because it could be staying, leaving a role and going to another role in corporate, or starting their own business, or maybe they just hear about different ways to overcome fear. So, what 50 means to me is consistency. It means persistence, right? As you mentioned, right? Um, keeping it going. And despite having a very, heavy load 9 to 5, still getting up and wanting to do this and do it the right way. Like, it's, from a branding standpoint, I want to make sure this comes out. It looks good. It sounds good. There is a sense of pride. Like, I'm proud of myself that I had an idea, I turned it into action, and now we're, who knows where this thing is going to go. But that kind of vagueness, if you will, is like, oh, I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm inspired by that, and I'm inspired, like, just to keep going. So I appreciate you asking that, because this has been a lot of fun. And as I'm kind of, this whole week I've been like, wow, 50, like not a lot of people get to 50. And yeah, good for you, Brian. Right. That's what
Yes.
I tell myself.
Good for you, Brian. Yeah, showing up for you. That that
Yeah.
that is really inspiring to me. Like you saying, I'm showing up for myself, and I don't even know who's listening. I don't
Yeah.
care. I'm just showing up for myself. So
Yeah.
that's really
Yeah.
inspiring.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, I just want to thank you so much for taking some time today. Your story, is something I've been following for a long time. Not only am I a customer, I'm a supporter, right? I love that, and would love for you to share where other folks can support you, and obviously support the product that you're putting out there.
Absolutely. So, my website is whippetgoods.co. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at the same Whippet Goods Co. You can follow me on LinkedIn, Ashley Morgan. I post things about, just updates on my story, um, share my brand, things like that. Um, I have some exciting launches coming up soon, so make sure you join my VIP list on my website. And yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, of course. Look, I appreciate that info. And look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank Ashley Morgan for joining me today. All of her information will be in our show notes. Definitely suggest you go check out her brand. The body butter, the sugar scrubs are absolutely amazing as a customer, right? And look, I hope you all have a great week, and we'll definitely see you next time. Thanks again, Ashley.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.